Hi, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to the first Housing Our Future webinar of 2026. My name is Kristen Baker. I'm the Executive Director of LISC Greater Cincinnati, and we're so happy you all are here today. We have a wonderful panel and conversation covering really important topic, protecting our most vulnerable neighbors. Where are we making progress, and where do we have room together to continue to improve for our community? So I'm really excited to have my friend and really one of our most formidable housing leaders here in Cincinnati, Jessica Powell, Vice President of Housing and Asset Management for Talbert House and member of the Housing Our Future Steering Committee, to facilitate this wonderful conversation. So I'm going to hand it over to Jessica to get us started. If you have questions, please use the chat function. We will do our best to get to as many of your questions as we can. And this session is being recorded and will be available on our website next week should you have to leave early or would like to share this with others. So with that, I'll hand it over to Jessica. Thanks.
Morning, everyone. Thanks for coming today. Just as backdrop for this webinar, the Housing Our Future affordable housing strategy was developed in 2020 by a group of housing and community development stakeholders in Cincinnati and Hamilton County. And so out of the Housing Our Future plan were 4 goals. And one of those goals was protecting our region's most vulnerable people. And so today we're going to really talk about that goal with some practitioners who are doing it every day on the ground with families, and talk about the strategies that were identified in the 2020 plan and kind of look at, okay, where are we now? How applicable are the strategies that are in the 2020 Housing Our Future plan for protecting vulnerable residents? Are the practitioners seeing that, doing that? Have we achieved any of those strategies? Are not pertinent to all of the new things that I think many of our organizations and our vulnerable populations are dealing with in this current environment? And we've got a great panel of 4 panelists, including Nick DiNardo from Legal Aid, Stephanie Seifert from Council on Aging, Megan Rahill from Project Connect, and Gina Jim from Inclusive Housing Resources. And so I'm going to kick this off by having each of our panelists start by talking a little bit about their work at their organizations and what they're doing in their organizations to protect vulnerable residents. One of the things that's up on your screen right now are the strategies that were outlined in 2020. And so either in their introductory remarks or comments, or later we're going to talk about whether any of these strategies speak to them in their current work or were relevant in the past 6 years, and whether we need to pivot. And so with that, I'm going to have Nick DiNardo kick off with talking about his work at Legal Aid.
Good morning, everyone. As Jessica just said, my name is Nick DiNardo. I'm the managing attorney for our housing and consumer practice group here at Legal Aid. And when we talk about housing insecurity, by the time they get to my office, there's a good chance that they are housing insecure. Just to give people some general ideas about the number of intakes we get, we serve 7 counties in Southwest Ohio in a variety of areas. Housing is just one of them. We also do family law, domestic violence, custody, those sorts of issues. All different kinds of public benefits and ways to help people get employment. And then we also do children's law, which involves helping children get educational supports if they have disabilities. So we kind of do all those areas. We get about 30,000 requests for assistance every year. And in all 4 of those areas, and in all 7 of those counties, we can only take about 7,000 to 8,000 cases. And so what that means is the majority of the people who call us, unfortunately, get declined because we simply don't have enough resources. When it comes to housing instability, so we've tried to prioritize the people who we feel are the most vulnerable. So historically, in preventing evictions, we focused on people in subsidized housing, because if they lose their subsidized housing, they're most likely going into the shelter system or going to be homeless, doubled up with friends and family. And we also focused on people who have really bad housing conditions, as well as folks who are suffering from retaliation from a landlord who's filing an eviction because they complained about conditions, or different types of housing discrimination. So those are kind of that was the main area that we did historically over the past 25 years that I've been here. And what we saw in kind of the late teens, by 2018, was that a lot of people that we were turning down were getting turned down because they didn't meet one of those categories, and they were behind in rent and didn't have the rent that was owed. And oftentimes they were only behind 1 or 2 months rent. And those folks were not getting an attorney from my office and were oftentimes being evicted over what, for all intents and purposes, was a very small amount of money, and certainly less money than it would take us as a community for them to go into the shelter system. So we started a pilot project back in 2018 with Community Action Agency, where we would provide rental assistance to people who had a one-time emergency and could afford the rent going forward. And CAA administered the funds. We provided legal representation in court. And basically that's allowed us to more than double the amount of people that we assist avoiding evictions. When COVID struck back in 2019 and 2020, there was a lot of rental assistance available then. So we already had a good model, and that was really successful during COVID. But obviously the COVID days are over, and we're no longer kind of shoveling money out the door trying to preserve everyone's housing in those types of circumstances. So we're sort of back to where we were prior to COVID. But what we've seen is it's still a really effective model. And so what we've tried to do here at Legal Aid is continue to do our core eviction work in subsidized housing and bad conditions, but also make sure we're putting resources into getting people rental assistance and combining that with an attorney. Generally speaking, if you have an attorney in eviction court and the case is just about non-payment and you don't have the money, there's not much we can do for you. You're probably getting evicted. The same way, if you've been approved for rental assistance but don't know how to navigate the court system, oftentimes people can still get evicted who have the money that's owed. And so we found this just to be a very effective way to partner with United Way, also with Community Action Agency, St. Vincent de Paul, several other community partners, so that we can combine our representation with rent assistance. And as some people are aware, the Help Center, which is a project from the Clerk of Courts, is kind of doing a similar thing. So we found that model is really effective. In addition to that, there's also a lot of low-income homeowners who are facing foreclosure. And it's kind of the same type of issues. It's oftentimes elderly or disabled homeowners who aren't able to afford rapidly increasing property taxes or aren't able to afford home repairs, those sorts of things. And so we prioritize those cases as well, so that we can, one, keep those homeowners in their homes and also preserve that sort of generational wealth for those families. This has led us to do some new things in our foreclosure defense and homeowner work that we hadn't done previously. In addition to trying to help people get property tax relief or get repayment plans to pay property taxes, we're also now doing some work in probate court, which is something that Legal Aid didn't traditionally do, but it's been very successful in dealing with people who have what we call tangled titles. It's pretty common in our lower income communities where there is home ownership that the person who owns the home, who's a titled deed holder of the home, passes away, the estate doesn't go through probate, and one or sometimes even 2 generations later, family is still living in the home, but that can create real problems for paying property taxes when a foreclosure happens, other things. So we've also started doing some work there. The last thing I just want to touch on in terms of our work is what we call our impact work. And what this often involves is, large buildings that are being threatened with being shut down either because of really bad conditions or because of foreclosures. These can be subsidized buildings. Sometimes they're just private, kind of found, affordable housing buildings. But we do try and do a lot of work with that as well, so we can preserve entire buildings so that there's not mass displacement of low-income people in those kinds of situations. So, that's the basic work that we do. But one thing I would just say is that another key thing that I think is missing from this work is what we really need is more affordable housing. In addition to my work at Legal Aid as a tenant advocate, I'm also on the board of Over the Rhine Community Housing, where we're trying to develop affordable housing in our community. And there's a huge gap in just decent affordable housing that's available. And so in terms of priorities that I see on this list from 2020, I think that, preventing evictions and preventing foreclosures is good. But on the front end, we gotta stop people from getting to my office in the first place. And that's going to involve more development throughout our communities.
Thanks, Nick. And I will say the Housing Our Future, one of the goals is actually around production of more affordable housing units as well as preservation of existing units. So there's a lot of overlap, and I think we would all agree with that. I'm going to talk, or I'm going to switch it up to we have Stephanie Seafried from Council on Aging talk a little bit about her agency's work.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me today, and I'm happy to share and to be here and talking about this really important initiative. My name is Stephanie Seifried, and I'm with Council on Aging of Southwestern Ohio. I'm a licensed social worker, and I'm currently the Vice President of our Managed Care and Aging Services here. Just want to go into a little bit of detail about Council on Aging, some of our programs and services that we offer. Our mission is to enhance lives by assisting people to remain independent through a range of quality services. We serve the older adult population, individuals with disabilities, caregivers, through a variety of programs, resources, and supports. And again, to assist those individuals to remain independent in the community. We have our call center, our Aging and Disability Resource Center, which provides services, resources, and information to older adults, people with disabilities, caregivers, and professionals. And I think for most of us, we know, as we age, individuals want to remain at home and in the community. What we are seeing in the population that we serve, our older adult population, they're on a fixed income. Most are, receiving, Social Security benefits only, low income, little to no savings. Either qualify for a Medicaid program or on our elderly services program, which is funded through our senior services levy here in Hamilton County. And that program is for individuals who may need additional support in the home, but can't afford to pay privately for those services. Out of the key strategies, there are a few that really resonate with kind of the work that we're doing and what we're seeing in the community and those needs. So the one that I do want to talk a little bit about is expanding the tax relief for vulnerable homeowners, increasing property tax burdens, creating difficulties for our older adults to remain independent in their own home. We continue to see this for the individuals that we serve. We are able to assist in ensuring that they're receiving the applicable benefit programs, such as homestead exemption. But again, that's just not enough. With the cost of inflation and cost of everything going up. We have participated, in advocacy work with our association to look at other avenues to help ease the housing cost burden. Another area that, we see a need for is around home modification repairs. And again, ensuring the home is safe and accessible for individuals to age in place. Resources may be available. However, with limitations with funding, limited resources, again, ensuring that the needs are being met and we're serving those who really need and can benefit from those home modifications and repairs. As we know, the aging population is growing, and due to the demand and increase over time, it's just creating more demand and need. And I know Nick talked about this, but this is also an area that we see is that there's just not enough safe and affordable housing, significant rent increases. When you're on a fixed and limited income, creates that financial strain and burden with those increasing housing costs, creating housing instability, potential foreclosures, evictions. Again, Nick kind of expressed a little bit about what they see. We also see that as well. And there are just fewer options with housing affordability and availability, usually long wait lists and openings for those that are, accessible and affordable units. Again, we are, continue to work through these key areas, and but those are the key things that we see with the populations that we serve. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. It's very helpful and comprehensive. Next, we're going to hear from Megan with Project Connect.
Thank you. Yes, hi everybody. I'm Megan Rahl, the Shelter and Housing Specialist for Project Connect with Cincinnati Public Schools. Project Connect is the department of Cincinnati Public Schools that works to eliminate barriers to education for students and families experiencing homelessness and housing instability. We operate under the McKinney-Vento Act, which was created in 1987 as a federal program to reduce equity gaps for students identified as experiencing homelessness, as well as unaccompanied youth. We exist under McKinney-Vento because the impact of homelessness on education is really significant. Periods of housing instability can impact a student's ability to attend school and achieve academic success because it can cause chronic absenteeism, frequent school changes, and high stress levels that disrupt learning continuity. And it can lead to lower test scores and hinder cognitive development. Homelessness is also associated with an 87% increased likelihood of dropping out of school. So some of the services that Project Connect provides to try to eliminate these different barriers are enrollment assistance, making sure that families are aware that they must be immediately enrolled into school, even if they don't have required documents and things like that. We also provide transportation so that under the McKinney-Vento Act, students experiencing homelessness have the right to stay at their school of origin for the rest of that school year, or as long as the homelessness continues, so that they're not experiencing that loss of, their school community and their academic achievements and things like that. So part of being able to stay at their school of origin is achieved by providing transportation. And this also occurs when students move out of the district. So if they were staying doubled up with somebody and then went to a homeless shelter out of the districts have to work together to make sure that the student receives transportation to stay at that school. We also provide kind of those more basic supplies like backpacks, school supplies, uniforms, things like that, to give students that sense of dignity and belonging, that they have all the same items that their peers have in the classroom. We also provide enrichment programming and advocacy as well. So in the 24-25 school year, Project Connect identified over 4,300 students as experiencing homelessness. And so far this school year, we've identified over 4,000. So we've really been seeing these numbers continue to rise year over year. And so you might be asking, who would be eligible for this, like what kinds of living situations. And so under McKinney-Vento, it would be defined differently than under HUD. So educationally, homelessness is defined as lacking a fixed, adequate nighttime residence. So for us, the living locations we see most often are families who are staying doubled up or couch surfing, like staying with friends or family, people staying in hotels or motels temporarily, or staying in or having been placed in a homeless shelter. Inadequate housing is also one where if you've received an eviction notice or you have some kind of substandard housing that you're living in that is unsafe in some way. And then substandard living conditions would be people who are sleeping outside in abandoned buildings, storage units, things like that. And then families are also staying in their vehicles. So for many years, we mostly saw families that were doubled up. So for a long time, the language that was used around family homelessness was more like the invisible homeless population, because you weren't seeing them as much. But now, things have really changed. Like the nature of homelessness for families has really changed. And we're seeing way more families and students who are sleeping in their vehicles or outside. So kind of what we call like unsheltered homelessness. So definitely very vulnerable families who are living in those situations. So far this school year, we've had over 300 students who've been in those types of situations. So Some added services that we now have are more around housing support. So we can provide emergency housing for families who are in these unsheltered situations, so up to 6 nights in a hotel. And then we also help coordinate with strategies to end homelessness and the central access point to help assist families in getting into shelter. And then we are also opening in a few weeks the Ohio's first safe sleep lot, so that families who are sleeping in their car have a safe place to do that. And this is kind of in reaction to a lot of what the families are telling us, that they do have to wait a while before they're able to get into shelter. And in that time, it can be really difficult to feel like them and their children are safe and secure in that situation that they're sleeping in. And then we also excuse me, we also make many referrals as well to community resources, like the ones that Nick was mentioning around rental assistance and eviction prevention. And we also are able to receive priority CMHA voucher applications for our families too. So when I was looking at the strategies, I really honed in on the educate and incentivize landlords to accept CMHA vouchers strategy, because I think while we're able to help families to get the voucher, I'm often getting calls from people who are not able to find anyone who will take it, and then they lose the voucher because they haven't been able to use it in the timeline that's allotted, and then they're kind of back to square one. So I think that's a really important strategy to keep working on. I also appreciated enforce and expand tenant protections and establish a county housing court. I think these are things that are important because many families we work with have housing, but they're experiencing those substandard conditions that I was mentioning, like they have extreme infestations or mold or structural dangers or lack of heat, things like that. And so I think those are things that would help to protect people who are in those situations and allow them to advocate for themselves. I would also add maybe incentivizing landlords to keep their housing in safe and hygienic living conditions, because a lot of the people who are accepting vouchers, the quality of the housing is, I would say, lower quality. I was also thinking too about strategies that might increase safety in neighborhoods so that people can stay in their housing. So I don't know if that's maybe putting funding towards support. Putting support towards existing gun violence initiatives or something like that. We also have a lot of families who leave their perfectly good housing and enter the shelter system because of gun violence and unsafe situations. Literally yesterday, had a family who came in, their 12-year-old son was shot through their window, so they're sleeping in their car outside of Children's Hospital right now. So was just thinking about kind of some of those more safety concerns as well. And then I think I would also add that the idea of protection is great through the lens of prevention, but I also think that we need to add the concept of reaction into that as well, because while prevention is amazing and is obviously the ideal goal, there are always going to be people who fall through the cracks of that prevention. And so making sure there's a safety net. So I'm thinking specifically of these unsheltered families, like how can we have more of a safety net, because shelters are over capacity with long waiting times and things like that. So a lot of people just really have nowhere to go. So just trying to think of maybe strategies that could address that. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. And then we closing out is Gina Jim. And Gina, you want to tee up your organization's work?
Absolutely. Thank you. I'm Gina Gem. I'm the CEO of Inclusive Housing Resources. We have just under 200 units across Hamilton, Butler, and Claremont County. We really focus on serving individuals who have disabilities, particularly a lot of individuals with developmental disabilities, through our contracts with the county boards in the respective counties. In reflecting on the plan and the process of the last 5 years of getting here, I think one of the wonderful things with the COVID was being able to really invest in affordable housing across the spectrum. And I think we've made some gains that otherwise maybe would not have been made were it not for those ARPA funds. I think looking forward to the future, though, there's a lot of threats to individuals, at least that we serve, in the housing that we've worked so hard to create and preserve. One of those is Medicaid cuts. County boards of DD, mental health and addiction services are all having to make this Medicaid match. And for all of those entities, it's consuming more and more of their levy funds, and it's becoming pretty untenable. So finding a way to ensure that we are paying attention to all those things that are also ancillary to housing is incredibly important. Not to mention the fact that families who, even those who maybe aren't traditionally what you would consider, disabled or elderly or in some way, more susceptible. A lot of us are just one paycheck or one medical event away from being in a really bad financial situation. I think another big piece is just the funding cuts for the creation and sustainability of housing generally. Those cuts have been coming and are continuing to coming. We're lucky in Ohio that Ohio has really prioritized creating some local funds to help support some of the loss of some of the federal funds. I think the disinvestment in fair housing activities at the federal level has definitely been a huge impact on the ability to support those, particularly who have disabilities. As you may be aware, disabilities is by far the #1 fair housing complaint that is filed. So when those systems aren't working very well, the housing for individuals with disability, it becomes much more tenuous. Lastly, I think one of the ones that really spoke to me was around zoning and zoning reform. We are seeing an uptick recently in zoning code and zoning code enforcement that really is very supporting of individuals with disabilities in the community, and those rules are actually very much been decided case law, but they continue to persist in a lot of local code. I think we really do need to focus on that in the next 5 years. And then lastly, kind of going back to the supporting all of the things around somebody that support them being able to be okay in their housing. The benefits cliff is a huge issue for a lot of people. Being able to both maintain a level of reasonable income without having a greater loss in their ability to meet the demands on their expenses. I do think that having a number of systems that are all very separate and require very separate qualifications and paperwork that are often very confusing, particularly for people who maybe have a cognitive disability or maybe who are aging. I think that anything we can do to help streamline that, whether that's creating some sort of central qualification or centralized verification system that can be shared across all those systems, probably would go a long way to be helpful, because that's likely what we have more influence on in the local level.
Thank you, Gina. So this is really helpful. If we could pull up the strategies again, and I think each one of our panelists talked a little bit about their thoughts on the strategy, and I want to just make sure we we look at, make sure we touch on things that we all might be aware of that are working. So on this list, I think, there's a few of these that stand out to me as like perhaps not feeling as applicable now that as it did in 2020. I mean, I think right now, I don't think there's any disagreement. We're all just trying to preserve as much of what we can to help vulnerable residents, like which everyone described about, like, right, like the need is increasing and the funding is feeling more and more precarious. A case in point is that one of our panelists was supposed to be Kevin Finn, and he cannot be here today because our community's COC funds, which go directly to help house homeless individuals, are in huge jeopardy from HUD right now. So just to kind of emphasize, I think at least what I'm feeling, and I'm guessing most everybody else on this call is feeling, which is like we're just feeling squeezed right now, which is probably an understatement. And so, with that in mind, I want to really highlight some of the successes that we have seen with some of these strategies. I'm going to call on Nick to talk a little bit about the enforcing and expanding tenant protections, because I think this is a big one. And I think it came out of many agencies and advocacy with the city, but I believe that there's a local ordinance that codifies tenants' ability to pay and stay in eviction court. And Nick, can you talk about that? And how does it impact your city clients versus your county clients? Like, what are you seeing?
Well, I wish it had more of an impact than it does. It was a really good first start. It's a well-drafted ordinance that the city solicitor's office helped with. What it basically says is that if you as a tenant can come up with all the rent that's owed, legal late fees, and the court costs, and either before or on your court date, that's a defense to being evicted. Right now, Ohio law says that once the rent is late, a landlord no longer has to take it. Now, many still do, but the fact of the matter is if they want to evict that person and the rent is one day late, they can. So pay to stay helps prevent that. And it's been a useful tool for the attorneys in my office, but we're having some difficulty getting the magistrates to enforce it for people who aren't represented by my office or aren't represented, by the help center. So I mean, that's where we've struggled. There's a lot of good protections in addition to pay to stay in the Cincinnati Municipal Code, but in getting the courts to enforce them has been a challenge sometimes, and we're not even really sure why. But that has, enforcement's been an issue. The whole reason for that, the reason why we drafted that ordinance, was to help people who don't have a lawyer. The attorneys on my staff can oftentimes defend people in a variety of ways, but this just seemed like kind of a common sense, fair thing to do. And just to give people some background, that path that was developed during COVID with the cooperation of the Apartment Owners Association. They were not happy with all the moratoriums that were going on during COVID for evictions and that sort of thing. And so then I brought up, hey, what about pay to stay? And they said, oh yeah, we could back that. So basically we have the landlord advocates and tenant advocates coming together and saying this is a good policy. So it's been, I don't want to downplay it too much. It's been effective, but we still have some work to do, I guess is what I would say with that. And with some of the other additions to the municipal code, whether it's limiting late fees, that's been very effective. Whether it's been some of the security deposit rules, less effective, but it's definitely a good approach because nothing good is coming out of Columbus, right? I better be careful what I say, but no tenant protections are coming out of Columbus right now. I don't think that's too surprising to anyone. It is a little frustrating. So we're trying to work locally with the city of Cincinnati and with some other municipalities. But so for people who are outside of the Cincinnati, but in Hamilton County, don't have the same protections that people in the city do. Same thing with rental assistance. I've got a lot more rental assistance for folks in the city of Cincinnati than I do outside of the city in Hamilton County. So we really need to kind of look at this from a more regional perspective, I think, too, to try and increase some of these protections.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you, Nick. One of the items on here is about educating and incentivizing landlords to accept vouchers. And I don't know if any of the panelists are aware of or can speak to this, but are any of you familiar with strategies to end homelessness's admission platform? And if you are, can any of you speak to that? Nobody is. Okay, it's not intended to be a trick question. But basically, I will say, and I know this because Talbert House administers a lot of permanent supportive housing programs using COC funds. One of the things Strategies has done is to create to use a software platform where they recruit landlords who are willing to accept COC tenants into their housing. The platform is called Padmission. So it's, I believe, open to agencies who work, open for agencies to use with their clients who work with COC and other Strategies funded programs. But it's a nice way for some of these programs to have a direct point of contact with landlords who are familiar with kind of a subsidized housing lease up and sympathetic to it and willing to lease up to those folks. And so that is just one example, I think, of some of the work going on around incentivizing landlords. Let me ask, and we're going to move on to some of the questions in the chat. But I heard loud and clear, Gina and Nick, from what you were saying. Like, I think our city efforts are going decent, right? But we are still having challenges with the county jurisdictions. None of you touched on this, but I'm aware of tax credit developments that were not able to go forward in, I think it's like Sims Township and Deer Park. And it's a shame, right? Like, we're able to make headway within the city, but we're still seeing challenges in the county and county jurisdictions. Do you guys have any specific strategy ideas or recommendations on that issue?
I don't know that I have a full recommendation, but I will say that when the Senate Select Committee on Housing had their report, a big chunk of that was on more around zoning, which I think is critically important. But I think in this area as well, doing some assistance, some technical assistance and training of local municipalities to explain what their responsibilities and best practices are related to zoning. I think affordable housing should be part of that TA as well.
Yeah, I had similarly heard of a project in Forest Park that was going to be an elderly project.
That's right.
And the city council there wouldn't give approval for it. And I was just baffled because I was like, this is going to be good new construction. It was a good developer wanting to put affordable senior housing, near where the Krogers and things are. It's just, so I think a lot of this has got to be education and some other issues. I mean, I'm not shocked by much these days, but I found that pretty shocking that a place like that would turn down really good development, in appropriately cited. I think there's still a lot of prejudices against family development, certainly. But I was really surprised.
This was senior.
This was senior. So it was I was shocked. So I think that's part of this is we really need to educate. I don't want to just pick on specific municipalities, but I think what we have to do is really, we want to develop in areas of opportunity. We also want to be able to rehab, aging affordable housing that's in more traditional lower income neighborhoods, or in some cases gentrifying neighborhoods. We want to protect that as well. So there's plenty of advocacy work to do. I think that's where this is going to go. I think that the county government is generally supportive of developing more housing. They want to develop more. So, I mean, it's not an issue with the county commissioners. Same thing with the city of Cincinnati, that they want to develop more affordable housing. It's just a matter of getting community buy-in, I think, in a lot of cases, and dealing with all the financing gaps that are out there.
Yes. Yeah. Are there any strategies that we didn't talk about, like any new strategies? And some of you guys touched on different things, but are there any other strategies that you would recommend from kind of your perspectives? Anything new?
I don't know this is fully new, but there are some tools that are out there that are needing to be refreshed, I guess, for lack of a better term, to make them really viable. The one that pops to mind right now is the single family tax credit, the state of Ohio tax credits, which would allow for affordable creation of home ownership. But given its structural issues, the $10 million in annual allocation for that is very underused and very undersubscribed. I know there's an effort going through legislation right now to make changes to that structure to make it more viable. I think paying attention to a lot of that and advocating for some of those changes is probably critically important for everyone that's on this call.
Thanks, Gina. Anyone else? Are there any of the strategies that you feel are any of the panelists believe or feel like are kind of just not applicable anymore? And it might be helpful, Valerie, to pull up the strategies again, but is there anything that should be stricken from the Housing Our Future plan so that we can really focus on other things?
Well, yeah, there was talk there about a housing court. So as a lawyer, I guess I should probably say something about that. The housing court in Cleveland is very effective. They have a similar court. It's called the Environmental Court in Columbus. I think it would be useful if we had that, but I'm not sure that's where the best place to put our energy. I will say that eviction court in Hamilton County has really improved in the 25 years that I've been practicing law and practicing in that court. I feel like it's still a very fast process, and I know that's why we're glad that people are doing tours of eviction court so they can see how fast it moves. But I do think we're seeing more tenant protections from the city of Cincinnati, and we're seeing better educated magistrates who can make better decisions on some of these cases. So I mean, I think we have seen some definite improvement there, and I think it'll continue to improve. So I don't know if we necessarily need a new housing court, but we definitely want to keep tenant protections in the eviction arena so that we can, eliminate or at least reduce evictions as much as possible.
Any of our other panelists have thoughts on strategies that we should kind of put to the side and not focus on?
I mean, I think just based on kind of hearing from everyone and all the panelists in the discussion here, I mean, it appears like all the strategies kind of are in alignment, and so I'm not seeing anything, from my perspective to remove or take off. Maybe just the continue the work and the great work that everyone is doing.
Great. And so before we open it up we've got some questions in the chat. I would just ask and every panelist to give what would their number one strategy be to protect vulnerable residents? And I know there's not just one, and I know you've got different populations of vulnerable residents. Maybe your answer is just more money for all of the things that you want and your staffing. But is there one, I don't know if I would call it a silver bullet, but one thing that would really have a big wow impact on protecting your populations?
I think we're doing well on the funding for eviction and foreclosure prevention. We can always use more funding to help cover arrearages and to pay for representation. So I think that's always it's been a cost-effective program kind of we're running here at Legal Aid, but I think we need to put more resources and more energy into developing additional affordable housing in our community. I mean, that gap is closing so slowly. I'm not even sure it's closing, but I mean, the amount of units we're bringing online each year, or the amount of older units that we're rehabbing and preserving, is just not enough to meet the need. With the rents escalating in Cincinnati, it's just, I really think that's where a lot of the housing instability across all organizations come from, the fact there's just not enough decent affordable housing for our clients.
Yeah. Well, and I will say, just from my experience here at Talbert House with our tax credit developments, is you can even do affordable tax credit developments, but that doesn't mean tenants can afford the rents if they don't have a subsidy. So it's kind of you need both the development, that gets it pretty far, but you also need, for many of our families, and I think the Housing Our Future plan outlined this, Just the highest need is with those folks who are 30% and below AMI. And so with that, you need more affordable housing. You can't operate affordable housing on just tenants paying 30% of their rent if they're at or below 30% AMI. Like you need a subsidy to help make it work. And so that's a challenge. Anyone else, any this is my number one wish strategy that you want to talk about?
The only other thing I was going to say the addition of affordable and accessible housing. So individuals who have a mobility disability are disproportionately on the lower end of the income spectrum. And so including, if not fully accessible, then, units that are convertible or that are moderately accessible, at least in affordable housing development, requiring that to be the majority of the units that are usable by all, I think would be important.
Great. Megan and Stephanie, do you have anything?
I mean, I agree with Nick and Gina around, just a safe, accessible, and affordable housing, just more of it. There's just not enough in our communities. And then again, exploring, specifically from an older adult population, what can we do around, tax relief there and other initiatives. So those were kind of my key takeaways and priorities. Thank you.
Yes, I agree about the affordable housing, but also with what you said about the subsidizing being necessary as well, because creating housing is great, but we need to make sure people can access it. And I know I spoke to this during my little spotlight, but for me, I think I am very focused on the point at which families are needing shelter. So like the shelter system is, like, for me, a protection strategy of like building that out more to make sure that people can access shelter when they need to.
Yeah. So one thing I do want to touch on, and Valerie, if you could bring up the slide, is just some of the metrics that we've achieved under this goal. And so under the Protecting Vulnerable Residents goal, the 2020 Housing Our Future plan set a goal over a period of 10 years to protect 15,000 households. And through 2024, we've protected a little bit over 7,300 households. I honestly, because I'm not going to go into the details of this number, but I know that it's based on metrics available to LISC and to Valerie, and that there's more work probably going into protecting households than just these 7,300. So I believe the vast majority of the 7,300 is based on data from legal aid of households that they were able to assist. It also includes some additional vouchers that the housing authority was able to get. But I do think, and this is a good thing, I think there's been more than 7,300 families protected. It's more of just a data integrity thing. And Valerie, feel free to correct me, but I think we've achieved a lot. And so I guess the question I have for our panelists is, how do you feel about our ability to protect an additional 7,700 households to reach this goal? Like, do we think, and I will say, I think a lot of the ability to protect came from COVID relief funds. So with that in mind, I mean, are we optimistic we can get in the next 4 years another 7,600 households protected?
Well, I mean, it was definitely a different time during COVID, and we're not going to see that kind of investment again, in dealing with those kind of emergency situations. So, I mean, we've had to kind of change a lot of the programs to make sure we're kind of being good stewards of the limited funds we have now. I think we needed that money back then because no one knew what was happening. Tons of my clients were off work, didn't have kids in school, whatever. I mean, it was a very one-off, kind of unusual time. So can we continue to meet those goals? I hope so, but I think we're going to have to keep being kind of innovative and creative in how we spend the limited funds we have. We're not getting a lot of support either from the state or from the feds right now, and in fact, it seems to be working against a lot of our purposes here. So I don't want to be too pessimistic, but I think there's going to be plenty of work to do to prevent that and to just try and be as effective as possible. Make sure we're setting good goals, trying to be as strategic as we can. I think that's really important now, whereas that was less important during the COVID time.
Megan, Stephanie, and Gina, what about you guys and your organization's capacity to continue assisting and protecting?
For our organization, I think it's going to be harder and harder for us to do this. We're very reliant on both local levy funds, and the state did not include the same amount of resources in the next biennial capital budget to support our population, our primary population. So certainly we'll be leveling off on the work that we've been able to do, and then hopefully just able to sustain what we've been able to do. But that means we're not assisting new people coming in.
I think for, our organization, Council on Aging, with the aging population growing and rising and the demand, at the balance, trying to serve as many people as we can with the resources and funding that we have, and continue doing that, but also advocating where we can, and continue advocating, collectively as a group to ensuring that we're hitting, those that are the most vulnerable, and trying to remain and keep them in the home, keep individuals at home. So I think that's something, we'll continue to do, we're committed to do. Not that, again, it's just a balancing act, right? Like trying to serve those that really critically need the services and ensuring that we're delivering on that. So I think it's one that, I ideally want to be able to continue and trying to hit these numbers and targets because it is important. So so that's what we are planning on doing and kind of moving forward.
Yeah, and from our perspective, I think, we obviously will keep working to support all the students within CPS who are experiencing homelessness with our kind of educational services. But I think as far as like the definition of protection in this context, we really are reliant on how much funding there is for rental assistance available, or like through the organizations that we're referring to. And it does seem like, anything that's available dwindles down pretty quickly in all different areas, including like utility assistance as well, which is something that a lot of our families really need. So I think, as much as we can, we are helping to connect people to things that will protect their households, but hopefully that will continue to be sustained until 2030. So
I like to think there's always November, right? So I want to make sure that if there's any questions, there's one question in the chat. It's a question for you, Megan, about what are the mental health supports available for your kids who are homeless?
Yes, great. Thank you. So I'm reading the question, and it looks like are there mental health supports for people who are experiencing homelessness? And we don't necessarily have any that are specifically for the students who are experiencing homelessness. They're open to all students who need that mental health support. And Cincinnati Public Schools partners with multiple agencies like MindPeace and Best Point. So each school has like an agency that they work with. So we're able to provide a direct referral to them to say, hey, this family is, going through something. Can this student receive services? So that's usually how we do it. And then if there are any additional needs. Like, for example, we often have sadly often have families where there's, like I said, with the gun violence, or there's been a loss of a family member. So we're able to connect them to Fernside Grief Center. So trying to always be growing our network of community partners, because obviously mental health support for students in these types of situations is imperative.
Thank you, Megan. I really appreciate all of you guys taking the time to talk about your work and how they align with the strategies that we came up with in 2020 and how we might want to pivot. I think, as we've alluded to throughout, it's no question. I think things have gotten really, really tougher for us in the past year or so. And I know we're all working to make sure that we're prepared collectively as a group to advocate when the time comes to get that right sized. And so hang in there, everyone. I want to thank the panelists for your time today, and I'm going to hand it back over to Kristen.
Thank you all. Really appreciate your insights and your expertise in this area, and appreciate all the work that you do every day to protect our community. So we are going to wrap this one up. We have a great series for 2026 ahead, including talking about some of our other key goals in Housing Our Future around production, preservation of existing affordable housing, and how our region is supporting homeowners. So I hope you will join us for the rest of this year. Our next session will be in May. So we will send that information out soon. And of course, our webinar will be available online next week, along with all of our archived webinars. The link is in the chat. And thank you all so much for joining us today, and we will see you soon.